On November the 28th, 2014, the Vietnamese National Assembly adopted a resolution to ratify the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, commonly known as the United Nations Convention Against Torture. According to the resolution, Vietnam will amend its legal system in line with the convention. The convention was passed by the General Assembly of the United Nations 30 years ago and now has 155 parties. The ratification is one of Vietnam's commitments prior to becoming a member of the United Nations Human Rights Council for the 2014-2016 period. The move is also considered the implementation of Vietnam's new constitution adopted in 2013, which says the legal system protects all people in terms of health, dignity and integrity.
Thế về hiến pháp 2013 của chúng ta thì quy định cũng rất rõ những cái nguyên tắc và những yêu cầu được thể hiện trong công ước. Thứ nhất là mọi người có quyền sống, tính mạng con người được pháp luật bảo hộ, không ai bị tước đoạt tính mạng trái luật, điều 19. Mọi người có quyền bất khả xâm phạm về thân thể, được pháp luật bảo hộ về sức khỏe, danh dự, nhân phẩm, không bị tra tấn, bạo lực, truy bức, nhục hình hay bất cứ hình thức đối xử nào xâm phạm thân thể, sức khỏe, xúc phạm danh dự, nhân phẩm. Điều 20.
Luôn luôn có sự tranh cãi là đợi đến khi chúng ta hoàn chỉnh hệ thống luật pháp trên tinh thần hiến pháp mới của 2013 có quy định về chống tra tấn. Đợi đến khi chúng ta hoàn chỉnh luật xong mới phê chuẩn hay là phê chuẩn luôn. Như vậy là đây là vừa là cái nỗ lực rất lớn của các cơ quan, nhưng ở đây cũng thể hiện một cái ý chí chính trị rất cao của Đảng và Nhà nước ta. Đó là chúng ta có quyết tâm chính trị trước để mà sớm hoàn thành cái thứ nhất là một cái chủ trương chính sách đúng của Đảng và Nhà nước ta, là tôn trọng quyền con người và trong đó là nghiêm cấm mọi hình thức tra tấn và đối xử vô nhân đạo. Và từ đó thì trên cơ sở hiến pháp, trên cơ sở một cam kết quốc tế rõ ràng, đối với một văn kiện pháp lý ràng buộc thì chúng ta hoàn chỉnh luật pháp của chúng ta. Như vậy thì tôi nghĩ rằng là không những là nỗ lực mà còn là một quyết tâm chính trị rất cao của chúng ta trong vòng một năm qua.
I think it is very important that Vietnam has recently even ratified two of the core United Nations human rights treaties, the Convention Against Torture, but also the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So we are moving towards universal ratification of all the major United Nations treaties for the protection of human rights. And I'm, as I said, very happy that Vietnam has also now ratified quite a significant number of these core United Nations human rights treaties.
Hello and welcome to Sharing Vietnam. Vietnam's National Assembly has recently ratified the United Nations Convention Against Torture, which is considered a major step of Vietnam in promoting human rights according to international standards. And in our program today, we'll have a conversation with Mr. Dennis Carey, the representative of the United Nations Development Program in Vietnam. He will share with us his opinion on the significance of the ratification and possible cooperation between the United Nations and Vietnam in implementing the convention effectively in the coming time. So hello, Mr. Carey. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So first of all, how do you describe the significance of Vietnamese National Assembly's ratification of the Convention Against Torture recently?
I think it's hugely significant from our perspective, from UNDP and the UN overall. We see it as a further sign of Vietnam's renewed or continuing and growing commitment to human rights. In the same day, we had Vietnam ratify the Convention for the Persons with Disabilities, as well as the Convention Against Torture. And that shows, as I said, Vietnam's commitment to these international standards that are held globally on these topics.
And what do you think of Vietnam's preparation for the ratification and implementation of the convention?
Well, I think the preparation is extremely impressive in terms of its speed. Vietnam agreed to ratify the Convention Against Torture in the Universal Periodic Review of Human Rights earlier this year, and then very recently, as you said, at the end of November, the National Assembly confirmed the ratification. So we heard today from an international expert that is very fast by international standards, and I think that is very commendable. Of course, Vietnam deserves congratulations for its commitment in that regard. Of course, the big challenge is, of course, implementation, taking forward the elements of the convention and enshrining it in national law and practice, so that it counts for all citizens in Vietnam.
Now that the convention has been ratified, what do you expect from Vietnam's implementation of the convention?
I think there is need for legislative change, so the National Assembly has a role to play. Of course, institutions have to respond and update their practices, including security institutions. We heard recommendations about the change to the criminal code. So, for example, to remove the possibility that evidence gained during torture can be used in formal proceedings. Whether that evidence is true or false should be immaterial. And if that is removed as a possibility, that serves as a strong disincentive, or removes the incentives that security forces or personnel may have to employ torture. So that was one important step that was put forward today. We also heard some good ideas about the role of other parts of society, whether it's media for awareness raising or other monitoring mechanisms that can be put in place to try to ensure that all people, all citizens can be free from any potential for exposure to torture.
On December the 8th, 2014, Vietnam's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in cooperation with the United Nations, organized the second international conference on the Convention Against Torture. The event followed a conference held in Hanoi in June to introduce the convention and its implementation prospect in Vietnam. The conference drew the participation of many delegates from Vietnamese government bodies and academic organizations, as well as international agencies. Foreign speakers included Brian Buckner, Special Investigator of the Board of Police Commissioners in Los Angeles City of the United States, and Professor Manfred Nowak, former United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture. They presented fundamental contents of the convention and implementation experience in the United States and other countries.
Vietnam is a party to the United Nations Convention Against Torture, and it has undertaken all kinds of obligations. I think the most important one is to make torture a crime under domestic criminal law with appropriate penalties, and that means torture is a very serious human rights violation, and it should carry a medium to long-term prison sentence for those police or other officers that have been found to have practiced torture. It is also very important that the government undertakes preventive measures to prevent torture by whatever means. So, for instance, that every detainee will immediately be brought to a doctor, brought to a judge, an independent judge, where he or she can also allege that he has been tortured during police custody, that you have a quick access to a lawyer, the right to habeas corpus, etc. So there are various ways and means how one can prevent torture by also keeping the police custody as short as possible.
Along with international experts, Vietnamese authorities also sent speakers to the conference to present the legal basis against torture and orientations to improve the legal system in the coming time. The local speakers included Nguyễn Thị Quế Thu, Director of the International Law and Treaties Office under the Legal Department, Vietnamese Ministry of Public Security, and Phạm Minh Tuấn, Deputy Director of the Ho Chi Minh National University of Politics and Public Administration, Region 2.
Một trong những cái quy định thể hiện cái thái độ của nhà nước đối với các hành vi tra tấn là thể hiện ở cái Bộ luật hình sự năm 99. Đó là vấn đề về tội dùng nhục hình, điều 298. Là người nào dùng nhục hình trong hoạt động điều tra, truy tố, xét xử, thi hành án thì phạt tù từ 6 tháng đến 3 năm. Và đối với phạm tội mà gây hậu quả nghiêm trọng, rất nghiêm trọng, thì sẽ bị cái mức phạt tới 10 năm. và người phạm tội còn bị cấm đảm nhiệm chức vụ nhất định từ 1 năm đến 5 năm.
Well, the representative of the American police force delivered a presentation today on the implementation of the Convention Against Torture. So, how do you describe the significance of the presentation?
Well, it's very welcome from our perspective, of course. The United Nations is a collection of its members, and we really encourage this sharing of knowledge between countries. UNDP, the organisation that I represent today, we like to think that we can help bring countries together and share experiences. So I think today we had a very informative presentation from the delegate from the United States that showed both the progress and the challenges, and I think that is reflective of probably every country's experience in terms of human rights and implementation of human rights treaties. Every country has its challenges and that it seeks to face up to in terms of human rights.
And regarding the United Nations agencies in Vietnam, what do you think can be done in 2015 and the following years in implementing effectively the convention?
Well, the United Nations here in Vietnam, we have been a partner to the Vietnamese government for many years on this area of work, and we are extremely happy to play that role going forward. The Convention Against Torture, I mentioned earlier some of the potential areas of focus going forward to fully implement the convention. In general terms, we would really encourage an inclusive and participatory approach. All parts of government have a role to play in the protection of human rights. We also have a role for media in terms of awareness raising. Lawyers associations and the legal sector can support in the drafting of legislation in this area. And civil society, of course, at the national level or the local level, can have a strong role in awareness raising and monitoring also. All of this then I think can be framed in the broad framework of the Universal Periodic Review, which Vietnam went through its second review this year, earlier in 2014. And the accepted recommendations from that review can form, or they do form, a framework for Vietnam's priorities in the area of human rights going forward. And the UN is very much looking forward to working with the government of Vietnam on implementing or supporting it in implementing the recommendations that it has accepted as part of that review.
Well, Mr. Carey, thank you so much for spending your time with us today and sharing valuable information.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Well, that's all for our Sharing Vietnam today. Hopefully, with the active support of the United Nations and the international community, Vietnam will quickly come up with solid measures in order to implement the United Nations Convention Against Torture effectively. Thank you so much for watching, and see you again next time.